Photographic record of an Apache man taken in 1900 at White River, inside the Fort Apache Reservation, Arizona. The picture is part of a visual survey the U.S. government ran around 1900 to document Native peoples under federal control. James Butler Hickok, still known as Bill, drove Russell, Majors, and Waddell stagecoaches between Missouri and war-torn Kansas. From 1858 until the Civil War broke out, he worked as a messenger, guide, and sometimes spy. He also spent a short spell as a deputy sheriff in frontier towns, a job that later fueled his fame as a gunfighter. John Henry Selman bounced between outlaw life and law work. During the Lincoln County War, he led the Selman Scouts, or the Rustlers, a crew tied to cattle theft. Later, as a deputy in El Paso, he walked into a saloon on August 19, 1895, and shot John Wesley Hardin dead, an act that sealed his Old West notoriety. On April 29, 1885, the 10th U.S. Cavalry, nicknamed the Buffalo Soldiers by Plains tribes, left San Antonio, Texas for the Arizona Territory to help wrap up the final campaign against holdout Apache bands. A photo from about 1890 shows a platoon already settled at Fort Apache. Jim Baker, mountain man and expedition guide, roamed the Rockies as the fur trade was fading. Around 1840, he was adopted by a Shoshone group after marrying one of their women, earning the settlers' nickname Red-Haired Shoshone. By 1883, living in Colorado, he told travelers stories of the fights, treaties, and trails he'd helped cut. Joseph Rowdy Joe Lowe, gambler and saloon owner on the Kansas frontier, got his nickname because he was always in brawls. Newspaper reports from the 1870s say his fiery temper, made worse by heavy drinking, sparked one gunfight after another until it finally cost him his life. Inside a Prescott, Arizona saloon around 1900, a worn wooden bar where miners swapped silver coins for whiskey, card tables lit by kerosene lamps. In the back, a grand piano keeps time for dancers and travelers fresh off the railroad. Newly widowed young New York Assemblyman Theodore Roosevelt spent time in the Dakota Badlands in 1885. Decades later, recalling that season of grief and self-testing, he called President Woodrow Wilson a Byzantine logothete propped up by the incompetent and the timid. Back then called Signal Mountain or Signal Peak, the rocky hill west of Big Spring in Howard County, Texas, was a 1900 landmark for settlers, cowboys, and railroad engineers. From its 560-foot summit, you could watch trains on the Pecos line and the first oil wells on the nearby plains. Plenty Coues, principal chief of the Crow Nation, photographed around 1908, was his people's last elected war chief. After Little Bighorn, he acted as a diplomat in Washington, negotiating land and schools and guarding cultural autonomy as his nation moved onto a reservation. The Jersey Lily, a mix of courtroom, bar, and hangout, was opened around 1900 in Langtree, southwest Texas, by self-styled Judge Roy Bean for the cowboys and travelers riding the new Southern Pacific Line. On the afternoon of May 26, 1889, right after the first land run, Guthrie townsfolk in the Oklahoma Territory massed outside the small jailhouse. They kept up a loud chant, demanding the sheriff free one of their own, held on disputed grounds. The standoff stayed nonviolent but showed how shaky official authority was in a brand new community. In 1893, small farmer Sam Johns posed with his working dog in front of the rough cabin he'd thrown up on the low banks of Flathead Lake, Montana, a snapshot of settlers pushing into native lands in the final decade of the 19th century. Shot about 1880, this photo shows a mule train trudging through the Arizona desert, hauling ore from Tombstone silver mines to the nearest smelters, highlighting how animal-drawn freight powered the early mining frontier. Antoine Moise, nicknamed Grizzly Door, and his friend Michael, both young Salish men, are seen around 1905 on the Flathead Reservation, western Montana. Sitting on a striped blanket, They're absorbed in a card game, a common after-work pastime for local laborers. A police gazette engraving from about 1870 shows Billy the Kid in a straight-up gun duel. He reacts instantly and fires at an unnamed traveler who had just pulled a revolver, an image of everyday violence in small New Mexico Territory towns. After the October 5, 1892 shootout, 5 dead members of the Dalton Gang were laid on the floor of the Coffeyville, Kansas jail for ID during the night. Emmett Dalton, hit 23 times, was tried, sentenced, and served 15 years before he was pardoned. On August 22, 1878, stagecoach robber Bill Brazelton, known as the Fearless, fell into an ambush 2 miles south of Tucson. 5 volunteers gathered by the sheriff closed in. A handful of shots killed him. His body was displayed in Tucson's plaza for identification, ending one of the region's last bandit sprees. Photo of the brand new Lewis and Clark County Jail, opened in Helena, then Montana Territory capital, around 1874. The stone building replaced an old wooden lockup and marked the shift from rough miners' justice to a permanent penal system. In 1893, a 2-story hotel was taken apart, loaded on wagons, and hauled 45 miles from Dimmitt, Castro County to Plainview, rising center of Hale County on the new railroad. The photo is thought to show the building on arrival in Plainview. On August 21, 1863, in the Civil War, William Clark Quantrill's Confederate guerrillas, with young Frank James along, raided the Union City of Lawrence, Kansas. They killed about 150 men and boys, burned most buildings, looted, and got drunk among the ruins. Harper's Weekly, September 5, 1863. A 1912 photo shows a dying woman with her 2 small children and a hunting dog at a seasonal camp near the railroad town of Winslow, northern Arizona, during the shift onto federal reservations. A circa 1900 photo shows the well-stocked bar at H. Cook's headquarters saloon in Augusta, Montana. Whiskey from the region and imported spirits line the shelves, proof of the money ranchers and travelers were bringing through the northern Rockies. Around the 1890s, George W. P. Ruffner, sheriff of Yavapai County, Arizona Territory, sits in his office surrounded by ledgers, sidearms, and paperwork covering arrests, taxes, and border disputes under his watch. Photo of the north stretch of Alvarado Street taken from Franklin Street, Monterey, California, 1887. The road is still unpaved, its edges lined with small wood and adobe shops. Wagons head toward the wharf. Kansas, 1873. After a quick gunfight near a dance hall on Main Street, 2 horsemen lay where they fell, reins still slack across their chests. Shopkeepers' wives at the doorway just stared at the bodies and went back to chatting, a quiet sign of disapproval toward the territory's endless violence. Stephen H. Meek, hunter and trapper who roamed the American West in the late 1800s, poses with his dog at Fort James, California, about 1880, when the fur trade was fading but small frontier posts still hung on. Photo of a miner outside the underground shelter he dug into a dry slope at Randsburg, Kern County, California, showing the makeshift housing common in frontier camps during the gold cycle, 1897. Canon del Muerto, a C-1905 photo of 4 Navajo riders traveling the canyon floor, a branch of Canyon de Chelly in northeast Arizona. It marks the post-Bosque Redondo era, after 1868, when the Dine again used the canyon's internal routes for grazing and daily travel. Left to right, Virgil Earp, 38, Civil War vet and Tombstone Marshal. Center, his brother Wyatt, 33, soon to star in the OK Corral shootout, and Morgan, 30, the youngest, killed a few months later in 1882. Studio photo from Denver, Colorado of an adult Ute man whose name wasn't recorded. Dated between 1861 and 1870, it's from the early round of native portraits taken during the Civil War era, as railroad expansion let photographers reach the Rockies. An 1880 dated photo shows a detachment of Apache scouts serving the U.S. Army, gathered near Globe, Arizona Territory, soon after campaigns against Geronimo and other insurgent leaders. Portrait of sharpshooter Annie Oakley, born in Ohio, taken around 1880 at the Baker Art Gallery in Columbus, before she joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, when she was still honing the gun skills that would make her a pop culture star. An 1887 photo shows a hired cowboy sitting outside the BT Ranch headquarters in Missouri, waiting for the morning call. The wood building in back stands for the frontier cattle economy. Between 1868 and 1872, cattle rustling in the New Mexico Territory turned into a big money racket for gangs working stage and new rail routes, pushing Hispanic and Anglo ranchers to form private patrols and press for tougher territorial laws. Santiago Ortiz was hanged on November 16, 1900, in the yard of the Yuma County Courthouse, Arizona. Convicted of killing merchant W.S. Moffett, the roughly 23-year-old Mexican climbed the gallows at noon. The trap dropped at 12:04 p.m., and he was pronounced dead at 12:21. With no family present, the county buried him. Records say the Cowboy Saloon, run by Stillwell and Stewart in Charleston, Arizona Territory around 1885, served as a social hub for cowboys and miners, housing trade, card tables, and frequent armed clashes. Forming a posse in Yuma, Arizona Territory, 1895. Townsmen called up by the sheriff gather on the Colorado River bank with Spencer rifles and Winchester carbines to chase stage robbers who'd hit the road to Tucson. Photo of the Lakota grass dance ceremony at Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota, about 1890. A detachment of the U.S. 8th Cavalry and men from the 3rd Infantry stand nearby to watch and contain any tension during the ritual. Nietzsche, son of Cochise and last Chiricahua chief, sits with Geronimo, spiritual leader and warrior, under guard at Fort Bowie, Arizona. In mid-1886, both waited for military orders sending them as prisoners of war to confinement camps the U.S. government had set up in Florida. Photo of the inside of the Table Bluff Hotel and Saloon, Humboldt County, California, 1889. Wooden bar, shelves full of liquor, and gaming tables show the multi-purpose feel of post-Gold Rush lodging and leisure spots. A circa 1873 photo shows a Uinta Paiute hunter sighting a percussion rifle during a subsistence trip on the dry plains of what was then the Utah Territory. The scene captures a group of men in a Southern California tavern around 1890. Sharing liquor, card games, and straight talk, typical of saloons that became social and trade centers after the gold rush. Rare photo of Josephine Sarah Marcus with her husband Wyatt Earp, taken at their Happy Days mine venture on the Colorado River opposite tiny Parker, Arizona, around 1920 at the foot of the Whipple Mountains, now in the Arizona Historical Society collection. Richard M. Dick Brewer, New Mexico Territory cowboy, served as ranch foreman for John Tunstall during the Lincoln County War, and led the regulators, sworn constables that included William H. Bonney, the future Billy the Kid, in chasing Tunstall's killers. Brewer was shot dead by Andrew Buckshot Roberts at the Blazers Mills gunfight on April 4, 1878. Photo 1875. Mission San Miguel Arcangel, San Miguel, California, c. 1882. Founded September 25, 1797. It was the 16th of 21 Franciscan missions that stretched from San Diego to Sonoma. Built along El Camino Real, it aimed to convert the Salinan people and run a farm outpost. It survived secularization in 1834 and, restored, is still an active church. The widely read Illustrated Police News of April 15, 1882, reinforced the popular view of Robert Ford's treacherous shot to the back of the unarmed Jesse James, ending the famous Outlaws' career and shaping public memory of the event. Bob Dalton, a former deputy who led the Dalton Gang, robbed trains and banks in Indian Territory and Kansas from 1890 to 1892, and died in the Coffeeville shootout. Eugenia Moore, dubbed Flower of Coffeeville, supplied horses, shelter, and key information, keeping the gang's support network running. The first house ever built in what became Dodge City, Kansas, a small wood structure, was put up by settlers tied to the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad between August 10 and 25, 1872, first serving as a supply post and frontier shelter for travelers and buffalo hunters. Photo of the Northern Saloon, which Wyatt Earp opened in Tonopah, Nevada, soon after leaving Nome, Alaska, c. 1902. At the early peak of the silver boom, the law veteran ran the bar, hosted card games, and worked as deputy to Federal Marshal J.F. Emmett.